A wonderful adjunct fingerboard-like control device that you can use with the Haken ContinuuMini. You can also use it with the Continuum, but I think it's best with the ContinuuMini. Is the Sensel Morph. This is a flat panel XYZ pressure sensitive controller that supports a variety of pre-programmed overlays, but you can also reconfigure those overlays with their editor. They support piano keyboard layout, drum pad layout, a music production overlay, Buchla Thunder overlay, and additional options for an overlay supporting a QWERTY or Dvorak keyboard. You can connect that up to pads or phones and use it as an external keyboard. They have a game controller overlay, an option for paint and drawing apps, and in our case, most importantly, a custom, they call it Innovator's semi-transparent overlay that can be used to create your own unique controller layouts with their Morph overlay design editor. Finally, the Morph supports an API that can allow you to create customized Max MSP, Python, or C or C++ programs to read the surface and interpret it in any way you like. So if their overlays are lacking features you need for your application, you can just program what you need. You can even get a special cable to connect the Morph to an Arduino, allowing you to program an XYZ sensor-based interface to anything you can connect to that microcomputer. In short, the Morph is an amazingly powerful tool, especially in our use case as a MIDI controller, MPE in this case, and best of all, the Sensel editor used to modify the standard overlays and program custom templates is so intuitive, you can literally learn 90% of everything you need to create your own interfaces in 15 minutes. Now you can go online and find a lot of videos on how to use and program the Morph, but I'll discuss how to use it specifically as a controller for the Haken ContinuuMini. Now while it will work just as well with Continuum, where it really shines is as an adjunct controller for the ContinuuMini, is it can be used to overcome the three main disadvantages of the Mini over the regular Continuum. That's limited Y width, duotactic two-note polyphony limitations, and also duotactic note averaging limitations. With the Morph, you can make your ContinuuMini behave very much like a slim Continuum in all these areas. And in that sense, if you have a Mini and you kind of want to know what it's like to play a real Continuum and you're hesitant about shelling out the big money you need to buy one for the very, very cost-effective price of a Sensel Morph, you can get that and get a pretty good feel of what it's like to play Continuum. Now the Morph, unfortunately right now, does not have an editor that allows you to program specific CCs to specific values at the press of an object. This is what you would need if you want to change presets on the ContinuuMini, for example. So we'll discuss primarily using the Morph as a MIDI MPE note controller, both using a standard keyboard layout and using a custom Continuum layout that we'll create and see how that works. Let's start by setting up the Morph to be able to be an MPE compliant controller for our ContinuuMini. Connect up your Morph to the computer or maybe to a hub that's connected to your computer. Bring up the editor and it should automatically detect your Morph. It'll show you the Morph ID and information about it, serial number, what firmware you have loaded. It's very nice that if the Morph detects that your firmware is not up to date, it'll give you a little indicator here and let you update it. Now we're going to want to set the top level settings for MPE. If you're using their keyboard overlay, you can set some parameters related to that, whether you want Windows or Mac modifiers, what kind of keyboard layout you want. We're not really interested in that overlay for this video. We're interested in MPE. So now we'll set our MPE settings. The ContinuuMini is a device that can play on 8 channels, channels 2 to 9. I'll set my MPE start channel to 2. I can go up here to channel 16. If I want to play a regular Continuum, I can set more channels. But for the ContinuuMini, I'll set my start channel as 2, my end channel as 9, which means I can play up to the maximum of 8 channels. Now I'll set an MPE pitch round mode. I'm going to use jump. This has recently been repurposed. Instead of a jump function, it's been repurposed to allow you to play a portamento and stop on a note and have it quickly round to that note. That could be very useful. It's kind of like a rounding function on the continuum. There's also a smooth option which doesn't do that rounding, lets you play smoothly. There's a gravity option that as you get closer to a note it starts rounding towards it, but I suggest you'll want to use the jump or the smooth mode. In most normal cases we'll use the jump for our exercise. And then there's a MIDI pitch bend range. You have some options here. We'll set that to 29 millimeters, which is the lowest value, which translates to the finest pitch bend. Once we have that set, you can send the settings to the morph. Every time you make a change, if you want the morph to configure to those changes, you need to send it to your morph. After I've configured my global parameters, then I'll add an overlay. We'll add a piano overlay in this case. I've actually already done it. So I'll bring up the piano overlay. This is just a basic MIDI overlay. There's no MPE set right now, but one of the wonderful things about this editor is that I can press a key. I don't have to set it for just a MIDI note. I can set it for any of these options. I can set this as a MIDI note. I can set it as a MIDI CC control, a MIDI CC slider, MIDI XY pad. I can set it as MPE XYZ, an MMC button. We're going to want to set our keys up as MPE XYZ pad objects. That will let me play in the X, Y, and Z directions on this keyboard in very much the same manner that I will play on a continuum. I've already created one of these. So let's go in and take a look at that. Each key is set up as an MPE XYZ pad. Each key I can set with a note. And I don't have to set the C on the keyboard as a C. I can set it as anything I like. So let's say you only know how to play in the key of C, but you want to play in the key of G. You can repurpose your notes to be able to transpose like that. Or you can make some unique scale of your own to map to the keyboard if you like. But we're going to set things on the traditional notes. We'll set it so that C3 is at the bottom and B4 is at the top. They give you this option to give you one extra note, so I can go from C to C in this case. You have to learn how to play that way to be able to just touch that high little object there to get your high C, but it's really useful to give you that extra note. Why didn't they just give you C to C here? Well, the notes are pretty thin on the overlay to begin with, so I don't think they wanted to make them any thinner. But as we'll see, with the Innovator's overlay, you can create anything you like. So then I'll set pressure. For what we're doing, we'll set channel aftertouch. That is what works best. You can set it to other things, to pitch bend, polyphonic aftertouch. You can set it to a CC, but we're going to set channel aftertouch. X, I'm going to want to set to pitch bend because I want that to play a nice smooth portamento. I won't set it to any of these CC values. We'll use the standard CC74 as Y that the ContinuuMini expects. Pitch bend, well, we will set to 460 in this case, not the minimum. It just turns out that for the full pitch bend over this 2 octave or so range, the 460 millimeter option is what you should use. This also maps to pitch bend of 48 on your ContinuuMini, so we're going to want to make sure that we're set to 48 on the preset we're playing, and threshold we'll set to low. This basically is telling me I want to be as pressure sensitive as I can be. We'll keep absolute Y and recenter CC options here. You can play around with these. We don't really care about 14-bit CC. That doesn't actually use CC87 the way the Continuum and ContinuuMini use it, so keep that off. With this setting, you should be able to play very nicely your ContinuuMini, and your surface will react very much like you're playing a Continuum, as we'll see. Up top, there are some buttons you can use. To be honest with you, the only ones I'm really concerned with here are the octave up and octave down buttons. Those, like most everything else, can be set to other things, but I've set them so that up is octave up, down is octave down. You can set some other things, but they're not that useful. As it turns out, you can't send sustain to the ContinuuMini or Continuum over MIDI. That you have to actually do with a pedal or a sustain function on the ContinuuMini itself. So your octave up and down are really all you want to set here, and you're probably then good to go. Now it's time to connect up to the Continuum. We'll bring up our Haken editor, and I have a little preset I've created here for this demo. Go to MIDI and Global Settings. Go to External 1, Music Data. I don't want to send control data. I only want to send music data. In the option list there, pick your Sensel. The only thing to remember is make sure that you connect up your Sensel to your computer or a hub connected to your computer before you bring up the editor, or it won't recognize this. So once that's done, my Sensel Morph is set up. I have a preset that's set up to be played by the morph. I want to make sure that my pitch bend is set to 48, which it is. Now I'm ready to go. I should be able to play MPE from my morph and have some fun. Okay, I have everything set up. What I'll start with is I'll go to their visualizer. This is kind of like the Continuum display function, and this lets me see how pressure sensitive I am on this device. It'll also let me see how Y responds. Unfortunately, it takes it out of MIDI control mode when it does this, so it doesn't play anything. But you can see, if I press ever so slightly, I can see that pressure showing up. As I press harder, I can continue to press, and obviously I see the pressure response increase until I can go way past the maximum here, almost off the screen. An incredible pressure response. To be honest with you, when you're playing this, although it's not giving you that feedback that you get with pressure on the ContinuuMini or the Continuum, it actually feels just about as responsive pressure-wise as a Continuum. You just have to get used to playing a flat surface to impose that pressure. And of course, I can play all my fingers on this thing, and you can see them show up lightly to heavy. Obviously, the difference in pressure of the fingers is all calculated and shows up as aftertouch when we're playing. We can also see that Y motion is active, X motion. It's actually an XYZ playing surface and rather flat, and all Continuum players were used to playing a flat surface, so except for that feedback that you get by the pressure of the neoprene or the pressure of the ContinuuMini plate, it's very much the same experience as playing a Continuum, of course in this case with a reduced range, which is why I ordered two of them, so I can basically create a 49 Slim right here on my desk. But I'm playing the ContinuuMini instead, so I'm going to turn my ContinuuMini basically into a Slim 49. Let's turn on some sound though. We'll get out of this mode. We'll go back to our MPE map mode. I have a preset here that imposes Y. I'd like it down an octave. Basically, I'm changing the spectral balance of my modulated oscillator, which is what this preset is for the most part, and I get almost exactly the same Y width on the Sensel Morph as I do on the Continuum. And of course you can see here the width that I get on the ContinuuMini is very much reduced. So that's one of the big pluses of this. I get full Continuum Y resolution, and the preset that I would play here that changes in Y, I can get that change, but to get those fine resolution changes on the Mini is very difficult. By the way, you might notice I didn't have a cable that's long enough to connect my Mini in the normal way. So what I did was I connected it up and I set it for reverse mode, which basically lets me play from the other side with the right X note relationship. Of course, Y is still inverted. That's a good trick that you might want to use sometimes. Perhaps you're playing your ContinuuMini and you find that you really wish you could optimize playing on the bottom, because it's much easier to play on the top, and maybe your preset is set so that you like where Y is on the bottom. Well, just reverse it like I did, turn it around, and then you can play Y in the opposite direction. Let's play some more notes to give you an idea what else we can do with this and how responsive it is in X, Y, and Z directions. Of course, I can play chords, no problem. I can slide to notes, no problem. I have it set so that when I'm sliding, I round pretty quickly on my note, which is kind of what I want in this case. If I want to round less quickly, I'll set it to that smooth mode we talked about. I have it set portamento so that it works correctly. There's my fifth down. Fifth up, everything's working nicely. And frankly, you can play a lot of passages a lot quicker, a lot smoother than you can on the ContinuuMini, or it might take you many hours of practice to do something similar on the ContinuuMini that I can play out of the box on the Sensel. It is, in my opinion, the perfect match as a keyboard controller, or actually a flat surface XYZ controller for the ContinuuMini. I love playing this thing. And one other plus is minor seconds are no issue. Even on the Continuum, that can be an issue. Finally, playing two notes, of course I can play up to 8 here. I don't have any duotactic averaging issues when I'm playing two notes. They are independently and very finely and nicely, dynamically controlled. I can't say enough good things about this. This is our MPE keyboard mode. Now let's talk about creating any kind of a playing surface configuration you want with the Innovator's overlay. Now frankly, the feature having this MPE-based XYZ keyboard to me justifies this instrument in and of itself. But here's where the real power comes in. You can take off this overlay. You can't see it here, but there are little magnetic implants in this that let the surface detect what kind of an overlay you're using. So you can simply get another one, put it on, and it'll instantly recognize what's there. And if you have this programmed for, in this case, a drum pad, you can just start drumming away. We can bring that up here. You can click an object, and just as before, you can set these to any one of the available configurations and program it for a MIDI note if you want, or program it for MIDI XYZ or MPE, anything you like. But now the really wonderful thing is they support something called an Innovator's overlay. On this one, you can actually see where the magnets are. Not that you really know what they're doing, but they give you the option of creating your own interfaces with a tool that we'll look at. In this case, I've created one that looks exactly like a Continuum. We can stick that underneath this overlay, and this will now detect that it sees that overlay, and we can go into our Innovator's overlay, and now we can program this to do whatever we want. But in this case, it's not a pre-programmed interface, it's one we created. They give you a layout editor, and in that layout editor you can select a shape you want to drag onto the surface, be it a rectangle, oval, or hex. In my case, I dragged a lot of rectangles. I resized them to the point where I created a Continuum-like fingerboard. I then went in after I created my basic layout and selected my objects and set them to MPE XYZ pads, and in effect I created a continuum playing surface on my Innovator's overlay. And just like the Continuum, this one doesn't have any silicon cutouts that have a little bit of surface differentiation on them. This one is just a plain flat surface. Just like our Continuum fingerboard is a plain surface, just like the ContinuuMini is a plain surface. Different surface texture, of course, different response, but in effect, I have a continuum on a Sensel Morph. Now, one of the issues is I need to scale my fingerboard to the scaling of their keyboard, or things are not going to work out right for the portamentos and the pitch bend. It would be nice if you could scale any X portamento range so that I could match the exact width of a fingerboard note to what I could put on the Sensel. If you notice, the note widths that I created here for this Continuum fingerboard are a little bit less than the widths of the real thing, but that's minor compared to the fact that I now have a surface that's very similar to what I'm used to playing on the Continuum. I can even use this as practice, but once again, I have full wide range. I have all of the features that I had before. I was even, in this case, able to create some control objects where I could set a few of these rectangles to CC 12, 13, 14, 15, which are my bespoke controls, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also I set gain to CC 18, and I can go into my map and see what I did here. I set this as a MIDI slider knob on CC 12. On channel 1, because I want to send my bespoke controls, this is the new term for barrel, on channel 1, and I set this up as an H slider, so I should be able to use this to modify some of the parameters in my preset. In this case, the timbre parameter is my first control. I should be able to change that parameter with this little control that I added. I could have added more of them, but I wanted enough horizontal space to make them useful. Now you can see this is a wonderful tool, but I'm not limited to this. What else can I do with this Innovator's overlay? Well, I have 2 octaves that I've created that map to a ContinuuMini-like playing area. This is close to the range of the ContinuuMini, but it's about half of the range of a half-size Continuum or the new Slim 49. Well, what can I do to maybe simulate a Slim 49 with a ContinuuMini using the Morph? I'll remove this overlay, and I've created another one that basically adds a second set of notes, an octave above the first. So I'll put that on. I'll bring up my overlay. Now normally if you've changed the Innovator's overlay to something else, you'll have to re-download it. I've already done that. All I did here is pull down the first set of rectangles that were the notes C3 to B4. I added a second set of them with the layout manager, and then I set those notes from C5 to B6, basically adding an octave above the notes that I already had. I set them all up to MPE XYZ, the same as the other notes. And now I have 2 octaves on the bottom and 2 octaves on the top. Works wonderfully. Again, you have to get used to playing on this surface because the notes are a little less wide than on the ContinuuMini. It also allows you to do a little effect sweeps between the octaves. That's nice. Very easy to do. Once you get the hang of the Innovator's overlay, you can just go to town and create all kinds of things. One other thing I did is create a Microtonal overlay. So I'll have to go back to the basic overlay that I had before. I'll send that to my Morph. And now I'll bring up the polychromatic preset in the Haken editor. I'll make sure that is set to 48 pitch bend. By the way, one thing I should mention, if you go into MIDI and global settings and you go to your preset loading, if you set this from its default replace to preserve, now you'll maintain whatever your pitch bend is and other MIDI encodings across presets. So I can go back to this one, pitch bend you can see is all 48 now. That will allow you to use your setup on your Morph to go from preset to preset and still have it apply with pitch bend without going into every preset and changing pitch bend. So the polychromatic preset basically on one note goes from the note itself to a half step above it. You can hear that clearly if I do it on the ContinuuMini. But on the ContinuuMini, there's such a small Y space, I really can't play polychromatically or microtonally in that area. So I went into PowerPoint, I created a grid that scales to the size of what I need for the Morph, and basically the top notes and the bottom notes are black and white notes, as you might kind of expect. The bottom is your bass note, the top is a note a half step above that, and I now have these colored microtonal cells that can play microtonally in whatever area you choose. The colors are arbitrary, but they can kind of map in your mind to red being close to your note and violet being furthest away. And now with some practice, I can play microtonally. Obviously, this will take some getting used to, but it maps a lot better to playing this preset, obviously, than trying to do this on the ContinuuMini, where you'll never be able to zero in on a particular microtone. And even on the Continuum, you don't have these nice guides to let you play microtonally consistently. That's just one example of creating a custom overlay that maps to a specific preset in the EaganMatrix. There are lots of other examples where you might create a different playing surface, say a percussive preset that assumes certain things happening in certain areas. You can certainly create an overlay for that using the custom Innovators technique. I think this is a wonderful tool. I can't think of a better external MIDI controller to use with the ContinuuMini than the Morph. You're used to playing on a flat surface to begin with. It's extremely pressure sensitive. You get full Y range. You overcome some of the duotactic averaging discontinuities you can get on certain presets on the ContinuuMini. It just is a wonderful, wonderful tool. I can't say enough good things about it. And I have to say, in all honesty, although I love playing the ContinuuMini, with this Morph, I can see now that I will be using the ContinuuMini's EaganMatrix sound engine all the time, but I can see that my days of playing this surface are going to be limited because I can do so much more with the Morph and in the process make the ContinuuMini sound very much like Continuum.